terms, the affirmative of the government is the team upholding the resolution. That can be a little bit tricky for critical teams because they're squirrely about it and reject the resolution. But in theory, the affirmative is supposed to explain all the reasons why the resolution is a good idea. The neg, as you would assume, is kind of just the opposite of that. So the team in opposition to the resolution. And specifically, it's the team that's making arguments as to why the specific plan offered by the affirmative is a bad idea, hopefully. Either because it doesn't work or because there's an alternate plan that works better. There's a whole gambit of negative strategies, but in essence, they just need to prove that what the affirmative wants to do is either a bad idea or that there's something else that is significantly better that would trade off with whatever the affirmative is trying to do. Status quo, because we all needed a Latin lesson today, is the way things are as they are currently. So it's looking at the current political climate, current economic climate, anything like that would all be parts of the status quo. In debate, policy debate specifically, when we're talking about the status quo, that's what we're looking to change. So one of the things the neg can defend, the neg always has the option to defend the status quo, as opposed to defending an alternate plan that is different and mutually exclusive from the affirmative. The affirmative, however, can never defend the status quo. Fiat is a little bit complicated. It's a term that comes out of philosophy to refer to when we create intellectual worlds in which to engage ideas before they actually happen. It's essentially a system of modeling where we imagine if a plan were to happen and try to lay out what would occur. In debate specifically, this is when we pretend that we're the United States federal government passing a plan and then engaging in what we think would happen were that to have been the case. It's used as an educational tool because it allows us to look at ideas and try to problem solve policy decisions. It's mostly important in critical debate because you'll get a lot of arguments about fiat being illusory, where people are like, well, but you're not actually the United States federal government, and this isn't really happening in Syria because actually we're in a classroom. And so you'll see debates about things like that and fiat education versus real world education. Another time you'll also see it discussed is in terms of the right of fiat that the affirmative has. So when the affirmative has a plan, such as the United States federal government will pass a bill increasing taxes, or something simple like that, you can, by fiat, say that that happens. So you don't have to defend it actually passing through Congress, or the president actually signing it, or this and that senator getting on the bill because they never actually would in reality. Fiat gives the affirmative, as well as the negative in the context of a counterplan, the ability to have one action that they can just say happens for the purpose of engaging what would be the fallout of that action.
So it's sort of just like you're making a hypothetical situation to discuss?
Yeah.
Cool.
So it's easiest to think about in which people will talk about the fiat world, and in a given round, that's just the world in which plans have taken place and asking what that world looks like.
Can you use fiat when presenting something that is a truly hypothetical case? So, because I know that it protects you typically, if you're the government, from having to go into explaining exactly how much money you need to allocate for a plan or where that money is going to come from, you know. But can it be used in other parts of the debate as well to say that, you know, you have some protection against an argument that where they would say, well, that doesn't happen in the real world?
So in general, no. But of course, it's debate, so rules are never solid. You can always make the argument that you get multiple uses of fiat. But there's a lot of theoretical debate that goes along with that. In general, everyone feels, or it is usually defended that everyone gets a single action of fiat. So you get to pick one thing, you get your plan.
You get your one mulligan.
Yes. And you can't have anything after that. And they will also argue that you can't use fiat to do anything that isn't specific to the resolution. So I can't use fiat to be like, the United States, if we have a resolution like the United States federal government should significantly increase investment in biomedical research, I can't use fiat to say the United States federal government will invest money in AIDS research and cure HIV. I can't assume that that will happen because that's the solvency debate that's going to be critical to the realm. What I can do is say by fiat that investment happens. And then we can debate about whatever is cured or not cured based on that and whatever spending trade-offs happen.
There will still be some invariance in principle.
Right. So in general, you only get the active verb of your plan, and that is your engagement with fiat, is to guarantee that that action happens. In some cases, you'll see a lot of people abuse fiat. There are arguments such as multi-actor fiat, where you're fiating the behavior of multiple different, usually countries, such as fiating the behavior of the United States as well as China to sign a pact on the Senkaku Islands would be an example. And someone would get up and they'd be like, actually, multi-actor fiat, you can only fiat the action of one person, and I still get access to my China backlash dissent. If we were able to, and the main argument behind it is if we were able to fiat the behavior of as many people as we wanted or as many countries, everyone would get up and just fiat utopia.
Yeah, we're all going to agree.
Yeah, so you would have someone get up and they would say, the United States federal government and all people in the world will agree to end violence. And some critical teams have done that. But you would run a theoretical argument called utopian fiat against it, which is exactly what it sounds. And will claim as an interpretation that everyone gets a single transparent action of fiat. So you get essentially one verb. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool. Prima facie is another philosophical/legal term that's used a little bit differently in the debate community than it would be in the larger community. In general, what it means is a primary reason for something, in essence. It comes out of ethics, where you say, killing is wrong, oh, but wait, if you could kill Hitler before the Holocaust, you probably should. So actually, killing is prima facie wrong, where it is probably wrong in almost all cases, but there can be extenuating circumstances by which that will change. And you always have various prima facie reasons why something might be true or might not be true, and there are multiple factors in play at any given time. In the debate community, what it specifically refers to is usually the duties of both the affirmative and the negative. So prima facie, what the affirmative should look like is an upholding of the resolution, and what the negative should look like, prima facie, is an opposition of the plan offered by the affirmative. A lot of times you'll hear these referred to as the burden of rejoinder on the part of the affirmative, and the burden of rejoinder on the part of the negative, and the burden of upholding the resolution on the part of the affirmative.
So, quick question, so is it like an exception?
So I can't totally
Is
hear
it
you.
like an exception for something? Like you said, like with Hitler? Like,
So, in debate, because rules only very loosely exist and we get to create them so long as we can argue for them in every round, you can't say it is the role. A lot of people will use that rhetoric where they say it's the role of the affirmative to look exactly like this. Instead, they'll say prima facie, the affirmative should look like this. But if you can convince me that it shouldn't in this round, then I guess it doesn't have to. Does that make sense? Okay, so stock issues. There are enough of you now that I'm going to ask you guys to try to define them. It was awkward when I was telling But can anyone tell me what stock issues are?
Things that are typically discussed that sort of you keep up your sleeve.
Dehumanization is a lot of the economy.
Yeah, your stock issues in debate are just your scenarios that are used all the time, and most commonly it's used to refer to impact scenarios. Dehumanization is a really good example. Did anyone have any other good examples?
Fiscal cliff was one last year.
Mm-hmm. Fiscal cliff.
Nuclear war with China.
Yep. China backlash. Leads to nuclear war.
Dead puppies.
Dead puppies is the worst of all the stock issues. But yeah, and so stock issues are really useful as something just essentially to memorize and have canned, because then all you need to do is write on your sheet of paper econ collapse or double dip recession during prep time, and you'll know exactly what that means. And you'll get up, and if you, my partner would prep me a sheet that would say global warming bad, and I would get up and I would start reciting all of this shit about ocean acidification and how that's going to kill all the phytoplankton, and how that's going to lead to this chain of extinction, and then it's going to lead to global extinction. Or in a nuclear war scenario, I would explain a specific way in which a debate over the Senkaku Islands is going to lead to China having a strike in Taiwan, or some specific scenario, and then I would just memorize how that scenario plays out. It's a really useful thing to do because it maximizes your prep time, and it also allows you to have really intricate scenarios without having to think too much about it every single round. And part of that is because we do end up debating the same things pretty frequently. And it allows you to develop a style. I know some of my students, I have one student who only debates the economy, and if he can make his impact about the economy in that round, he absolutely will. If I could make my impacts about science or medicine, I absolutely would, because I knew a lot about it and I had those stock issues down. You can also see larger stock positions. The economy would be an example. Criticisms, for a lot of people, also are kind of an example of a similar thing. Everyone, any questions on that? Any of the ones on the stage? Cool. All right. Debate, speaker positions, and requests. So, can you tell me what the position is, how long its speech is, and what the goal of the speech is?
Prime Minister. 7-minute speech. To affirm the resolution and give pledge amnesty.
Awesome. So the PM is the first speech of the round. It's supposed to set up the affirmative constructive case. The main goal of that is to give the plan and give a couple advantages as to why plan is a good idea. Plan, in your very, very vast majority of the time, needs to be upholding the resolution, unless the negative has a really good argument, or unless you have a really good argument as to why you don't. Yellow.
Leader opposition. 8-minute speech. Counter the Prime Minister's speech.
Cool. Yeah, exactly. So the LO is going to get up. This is when you're going to hear your topicalities, when you're going to hear your disadvantages. It's one of the harder speeches in the round, partially because it's your first main chance to construct the whole gambit of strategies that you want to have on the negative side. Because you're going to while you can technically offer new positions in the member of opposition speech, it's usually not a good idea. And ideally, you're going to want to get as many of those positions out during the leader of opposition speech as you possibly can, so that later you can pick whichever one ends up being the strongest or most strategic within that round. MG.
Member of the government.
How long is the speech?
8 minutes.
8 minutes. They're all 8 minutes for a little bit. Actually,
They pretty much support the Prime Minister in countering opposition to from the leader of opposition, and they can introduce any new elements to their argument. If that's the last opportunity to do so.
Yeah. So member of government is, in my opinion, definitely the hardest speech of the entire round. The MG-LO speaker position, in my opinion, is certainly harder. And part of why is the member of government's role is to respond to every single thing the LO said. They have to fully respond to every position and reconstruct the case so that the Prime Minister has something to build off of in the final speech of the round. It's very difficult, partially just because you have to cover so many things. But when done well, absolutely devastating. Emma.
8 minutes. Constructive.
Constructive. Yeah, so the member of opposition is pretty analogous to the MG. It's a little bit different on the opposition side because the opposition has what's called the block, which is that the MO and the LOR are both oppositional speeches, and they're back-to-back. A lot of people say that this is going to be the 12 worst minutes of your life. Because someone's going to get up and for 12 minutes tell you all the reasons why whatever you said is just a horrible idea. And so in the MO, similar to the MG, you're responding to everything that the previous constructive speech said. So here you're responding to the MG by building off of the positions that the LO set up for you. You can technically bring up new positions in the MO. That's called bringing up new positions in the block. And it's a risky move, partially because the PMR is then able to respond to them, and the PMR is the last speech of the round, and you really don't want the other team to get the last word on an argument. It's usually just not a good idea, but it can be done. Yeah, and so the main goal of the MO is to respond to these arguments and set up the LOR. The LOR is the last speech of the round. It's 4 minutes long. Can anyone tell me how it's different than all of the constructive speeches and what the goal of it is?
To summarize the case and give clear examples of why opposition is wrong.
Yeah, so it does summarize the case, but the way in which you want to do that that's really critical is rebuttal speeches are all about framing the round for the judge and explaining to the judge how you want them to evaluate the arguments. It's really important that you don't spend all of your time just reiterating what was said, but rather highlighting why certain things matter and how they relate to each other. The LOR is particularly difficult because you have to preempt what the PMR is going to say, which is an analogous speech just from the affirmative. It's also 1 minute longer. So what you'll usually hear in a really good LOR is I would get up and I would say, the other team is going to go for this nuclear war scenario, but because we are getting too much leeway on our link turn that China is actually going to side with Russia over the Senkaku Islands, they're never going to get access to this disadvantage, and we subsume that access. So you're always going to be looking at our impact on our economy disad. So looking at the ways in which those arguments interact and telling the judge in a very literal sense, look here, look there, this argument does matter, this argument doesn't matter. And in the LOR specifically trying to preempt which arguments the PMR is going to say matter and give a reason why they shouldn't. The tricky speech takes some practice. But you're framing the round for the judge in terms of voters. Does everyone know what a voter is? Pretty self-explanatory. It's just a reason for the judge to vote for one side or the other. And voters specifically are looking at very specific arguments in different places. One of the things that's so important in the rebuttals is to make sure you're doing impact calculus. One of the things that's really common is for people to forget to pull across their impacts and just start with the arguments of whether or not their impacts happen rather than what their impacts are and whether one impact is more important than one of the other ones. Instead, you want to be talking about your impacts in terms of which one's going to come first, which one's more likely, which one's worse. things like that. So really looking at how arguments interact. POI.
Point of information.
Point of information. What is that?
It's where you ask the other team to clarify something or repeat something.
Can anyone tell me which speeches point of informations are used?
Co-president.
Mhm. So point of informations are a little bit sneaky and they're very strategic. Most people should try to ask a couple of them during constructive speeches, if for no other reason than to slow the other team down so that they have to stop and maybe hopefully lose their train of thought. It's kind of sneaky, but people do it all the time. In theory, they're supposed to be clarifying questions, but in general, you want to ask questions that are pointed and are going to be strategically helpful for you in the future. Sometimes that means asking a question like, how much money specifically is this plan going to cost, so that you have access into running a disadvantage that's about spending too much money. You can also try to ask pointed questions to elucidate the way in which their argument maybe doesn't matter. For example, if someone's running an extinction scenario and their link into that is some obscure bird that lives in Argentina, ask them if there's ever in history been a keystone species that has led to extinction. Their answer will be no, as we are not extinct, and it will undermine their entire position. And it gives you something to work off of in your speech as well. A lot of people try to make sure that you're taking at least one or two questions during your speech if the person is raising their hand. Some people stand, you can really just raise your hand. A lot of people think it's very discourteous if you don't take any questions. You do have what's called protected time, which is the first minute of your speech and the last minute of your speech, during which time no one can ask you questions. But take some questions. It's really rude if you don't. All right. POO.
Point of order.
Point of order. What is that?
To address violations of rounds such as constructive and a rebuttal speech.
Yeah, so point of order most specifically is referring to questions asked during rebuttal speeches to reference new arguments. So no new arguments can be made in the rebuttal, which is why you're looking so much at looking at the way arguments interact with each other. So point of orders are used during rebuttal speeches in order to say that argument is actually new, or that argument is characterized differently, or the way that nuclear war is happening isn't the same as it was in your first position. Arguments that are new in the rebuttal speech are supposed to be disregarded, and the judge isn't supposed to evaluate them anymore. You also stop time while those questions are being asked during the rebuttals, which is untrue of point of information. During a point of information question, as well as its answer, the time just continues to run. Any questions?
Point of personal privilege.
Do you want to define that one for us?
Is if you feel that personal abuse is taking place in the realm. So if you are being abused personally by a member of the other team, then you can call for a point of personal privilege and state to the judge that the educational value of the round or the safety of the round is being threatened, and ask them to come to an RFD right away in order to end the round.
Awesome. Yeah, point of personal privilege does exist within the parliamentary debate community. I have personally never seen one, even when I've seen some pretty offensive rounds. They're used much more frequently in other styles of public forum. But were you offended, you can totally use them. Everyone will know what you mean. Yeah, so awesome, thank you. All right, topic slang. What is a resolution? Anybody?
It's what you discussed with the question at hand.
Mm-hmm. All right, so it's what we're supposed to discuss in round. In general, it always has an actor as well as a suggested action, usually with phrases like so-and-so should do X, and the burden of the affirmative is to uphold that thing, opposition to negate it. There's several different types of resolutions. What we usually see in parliamentary debate is a policy-style resolution. Can anyone tell me what a policy style is? Yeah.
When a resolution says should and it's a call to enact a certain bill or take a certain procedure.
Yeah, so the resolution calls for action. Can anyone give me an example?
The U.S. federal government should decrease use of the foreign.
Should decrease what?
Dependency on foreign oil. Let's use this
That
one.
sounds so similar to something I just heard.
Deja vu.
Awesome. Anyone want to take a stab what a value resolution is?
That something should be valued over something else. Sometimes it does have the word should, like policy resolutions would, but it is asking for two things to be weighed.
Cool. So the res asks for the weighing of value and addresses questions of morality. This is much more common in things like Lincoln-Douglas debate. You tend to not see resolutions that are actually phrased this way. But can someone try to give me an example of what one might look like?
United States should value national security over personal privacy.
Yeah.
Good one.
All right, awesome. Fact. The silliest of all the rounds.
True or false?
No. All it wants is for you to address the veracity of the claim. So, is this true? Is it not? Did this happen? Did it not? Any example?
So the United States is the greatest country.
That's actually more of a value argument because there is an argument about it. A true fact round would be something where you probably could just pull census data and answer the question. A lot of things do have debate about them, but maybe a good example would be Obama is not a national American. That one could arguably be a debatable fact, but that's as close to just a black-white fact as you would tend to see.
Typically, with one of those fact debates, would the length of time you have to discuss each thing be shorter because that seems fairly cut and dry?
It does, that's why they're horrible. The thing. Yeah.
One that I saw in the finals of Santa Clara a couple years ago was the New York Giants will beat the Green Bay Packers in the Super Bowl.
They can't play the Super Bowl.
It might have been different teams, but I don't really remember. But that was the resolution.
That's a lot of resolution.
No debate person would know that.
I know it's the
Perfect.
Giants.
That's simple.
They're programs. I'm like, are they?
Sure, whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, so fact rounds are
I
really
wasn't paying
uncommon.
attention.
I think I had one round that I actually debated in that we were like, that's pretty much just a factual question. And you can always kind of find a way to get around it. I wouldn't recommend deliberately making the round about fact, but these three things are important because when you get up, no matter what your resolution is, we could always arguably twist them around so that the United States should value national security over personal privacy is a policy resolution because I can create an action in which the United States federal government starts collecting phone calls and screening them to find terrorists. That is an action that instills this value. That would turn it into a policy round. I can look at the policy res the United States federal government should decrease dependency on foreign oil, and say the United States federal government will decrease dependency on foreign oil in order to undervalue the way in which hyper-consumerist culture is leading to the objectification of humanity and labor, right? And so you could turn that into a value round. So a lot of times what you'll want to do is you'll want to get up at the beginning of the round and you'll want to say which system of resolution you're interpreting the resolution under, whether you're interpreting it as a value-based resolution, fact-based, or policy-based. 99 times out of 99 times, you're going to say a policy round, unless you're wanting to debate it from a critical perspective, in which case you'll do something that's kind of in between value and policy, depending on how you run your criticisms. Does anyone know what the trichotomy refers to? It just refers to the fact that all three of these exist. It's a paradigm essentially arguing that all three of these types of resolutions do exist and that they should all be weighed equally. A lot of people don't think that's true because fact rounds are silly, but it is a thing. So. The one other type of resolution that you'll see a lot, or not a lot, infrequently, that's worth mentioning is every now and then you will see metaphor resolutions, such as Obama. One I heard was Obama played the violin as all of Rome fell. And during a round like that, you would get up and you would interpret what the resolution means. I think at the time, I think it was I don't remember when that happened, but it was an obvious reference to something that happened in his failure to address international policy. But you can interpret it in any way that you want. So metaphor rounds, they do happen, they're less frequent, and usually you're only going to see them at an NPDA style tournament. Does anyone have any questions on any of these? Well, parts of an argument. Claim. Statement we're trying to prove. Statement we're trying to prove to be true or prove to be right. Can anyone give me an example?
The economy is up.
A warrant is evidence to support that. What would be evidence for that claim?
Unemployment levels are down. GDP is growing.
Impact. Why does that claim matter?
Because the resolution has something to do with the economy.
But yes, I more mean when you create an argument that is an impact in the round, it's a claim for why, it's a statement of why that claim is important. Why should I care about the fact that the economy is going up?
More jobs in the economy.
The economy up is good for a whole slew of reasons. And then you would give those reasons. Try always to make your impact scenarios as specific as possible. When I would run the economy, I would literally talk about how depleted protein sources and malnutritious diets in children lead to osteoporosis. So make things that specific. The more specific, the better they'll sound. All right, stock issues, just to go over them. These are the Prima Facie standards of everything that you need to have within an affirmative case. Just remember, shit, right? It's cute. It's also in the wrong order, but apparently actually the TIS, but that sounds far less vulgar and exciting. So the first one is topicality. Your argument has to be upholding of the resolution. It has to be on topic. That's why topicality debate is something that happens all of the time, because if the negative can prove that you didn't uphold the resolution, then they can make a very strong case for why you should lose the round because of it. Inherency, looking at the problems in the status quo, those problems have to still exist. And problem specifically here is looking at whatever problem your plan is trying to address. So if your plan is trying to pass a bill, and that bill has already been passed in the status quo, your plan has no inherency because the problem doesn't exist anymore, because because the plan was already passed in the real world. It's very similar to, on negative, what you'll hear in uniqueness arguments, looking at things specific to the status quo that make your argument relevant or not. Harms. Whatever problem you're talking about, so in this case, let's consider an environmental bill. Harms are whatever is problematic in the status quo that results from the fact that this action hasn't yet taken place. So how many forests are being chewed to death by all of these beetles because we haven't passed a plan to improve wildlife preservation? What harms are we addressing that make this so important? Significance.
The harms is also background in PTE style, is that right?
Harms are background that's specific to an advantage. You'll also give a background that's at the very top of your case that's just background on the overarching topic, but a lot of times that'll also have harms mixed into it. That's more of a stylistic preference. You can put harms up there. You can also, I would often just put them at the top of my advantages. Because the harms for your economy advantage and the harms for your international relations advantage will be very, very different. But that is a stylistic choice. Significance, what you're talking about has to be important, otherwise I have no reason to vote for you. And solvency, you need to prove that your plan does actually solve that problem, that the harms will be resolved if I vote for plan. All right. Types of arguments that you can have on the government, and these are common position type arguments. Does anyone know what net benefits is? It's also called utilitarian paradigm.
In the end, the most people benefit from the passage of the resolution.
Bigger number wins. And that's a little bit reductive of what it actually means, but it's all, in net benefits world, it's all about a game of balancing the probability and the numbers. And if I can prove that it's more likely that my plan results in more, or saves more lives than your plan does, my plan wins. And it becomes a very calculative thing. That's part of why we call it impact calculus at the end of a round. And this is the weighing paradigm that the vast majority of rounds are going to function in. The alternate paradigm would be paradigms such as a value to life, where you say we need to value every life infinitely, so even though my plan kills 10 people and yours only kills 1, that one person is as valuable as those 10 lives, and we should do as much as we can, and you can't weigh it that way, and weighing things on body count is immoral, things like that. That's something you'll hear from a lot of critical frameworks, but most policy rounds are going to stick to this net benefits. An advantage, as a type of position, exactly what it sounds like. It's just a position explaining why, giving a scenario that demonstrates the plan is a good idea. So this would be things like your economy advantage. Plan's going to fix the economy. Plan is going to fix Israel-Palestine relations. Plan is going to improve our relationship with Venezuela. Things like that. Those are all advantages. So saying what is going to happen that is particularly good, and an advantage is going to flush out how exactly you come to achieve that good thing. Anyone know what a permutation is?
To impose the plan and the counter plan? Or
Close. That is a type of permutation.
It's more like the government side absorbs the opponents, or it absorbs the opposition side because they're not mutually exclusive, because the opposition side's argument is not mutually exclusive.
So it's usually used it's always used in the context of either an alternative or a counterplan, and it's creating a new textual advocacy that is a combination of the plan and the counterplan / alternative. These are really useful in a lot of different ways. One thing that is really important is that they are not advocacies. They are tests of competition. So a permutation, if I get up and I'm telling you a plan about subsidies for oil in the United States, and you get up and you start talking to me about food aid in North Korea, and don't give me an argument why those two things interact at all, but you're like, but seriously, I'm literally saving millions of lives with all of this food aid, I'm going to get up and I'm going to be like, okay, well, let's just do both of those things. There's absolutely nothing wrong with subsidizing oil and then also feeding all these starving Korean children. So starving Korean children are no longer a reason to vote against my case, because you can do them both at the same time. So this is where mutual exclusivity comes into play. If someone has a counter plan, it needs to be mutually exclusive from your plan, but it also needs to be competitive, which means if you can't do them at the same time, either because your counter plan is something like don't do the plan, or something like that, or you can't do the plan and not do the plan, or it would be something such as a spending trade-off where you can only spend money on one thing, or something to that extent. Without competition, there's never a reason to vote for the counter plan instead of the plan, and it stops being a reason to vote neg. A critical PMC, anyone want to take a stab at that? It's exactly what it sounds like.
So where you critique the resolution instead of affirming it?
Yep. So it's just when you run a criticism on the affirmative position, that can look like a couple of different things depending on how you feel about the resolution. More often than not, it is people criticizing the resolution and failing to uphold it. And then they need to give a whole lot of arguments why they should be released from their shit's burden of upholding the resolution. You can also see some criticisms that take a critical advocacy that still achieves whatever the plan is hoping to do. So sometimes you'll see, what's a good example? You'll see a criticism that does something about re-enfranchising certain groups that would be viewed as marginalized in the status quo, and you might have a critical PMC that talks about re-enfranchisement and oppression and how, or perhaps natives or something like that, and how we need to re-enfranchise First Peoples and destigmatize and stop dehumanizing them. Those would all be examples of running a critical PMC that is still upholding the resolution at the same time. And you can also run critical advantages without necessarily having a critical plan. What's uniqueness?
How original your argument is.
It's problems in the status quo the resolution will change.
Yeah, so uniqueness is just looking at why your argument is uniquely important, essentially. So not why your argument is unique, but why it's uniquely important. Why do I need to do this thing to solve this problem instead of something else? Or why is this thing specifically a good choice for fixing that problem? Alright, speed up just a little bit because we're running out of time. Links are exactly what they sound like. It's just giving a reason why whatever your plan does links into whatever your impacts are. So if my plan passes an environmental bill and then my impact is the economy, there's some steps there where I need to explain to you why saving trees is also going to save the economy, because that isn't obvious. Even when those things are obvious, when it's something like, let's pass Medicare reform and my impact is healthcare improved, you still need to make link arguments as to why and how exactly that is going to take place. And then your impacts we've already talked about. They're just giving the why is it important factor. So why is it important to save the economy? Why is it important not to go to war? And why, therefore, is your action important? Because it, say, saves the economy or avoids nuclear war. And make sure you're making your impact stories as specific as possible. It'll help you a lot. So arguments on the opposition side, framework, which actually exists on both sides, is just telling the judge how to evaluate the round. On the affirmative, this is setting things up as net benefits versus value to life. On the opposition, you can respond to that and set up an alternate framework if you want, or if it serves the type of arguments you make. Framework debates are particularly important in critical debate, because a criticism is going to want a very drastically different way of evaluating the round than a policymaker round is going to want. Theoretical positions. In the scheme of overarching, there are like 3 overarching types of argument in debate. You have straight up debate, which is debating the actual resolution. Is it a good or bad idea for the US to do X? You have critical debate of what is the underlying paradigm that supports doing X, and does that make us bad people? Like, your actions may save lives, but they were also sexist, so you should lose the round. That would be a critical style argument. A theoretical argument is a meta level of argument about the actual game of debate. Topicality is a good example, where I get up and I say, you as the affirmative have a non-topical case, which means you failed to uphold the resolution, therefore you broke the rules of the game, and you should lose the round. Examples are things like Topicality, as well as debates about whether or not certain styles of argument should be run or not. So things like picks are bad, conditionality is bad. Conditionality being when you run arguments that you don't have to defend for the entirety of the round. So I, as the affirmative, have to defend the resolution in my plan text for the entirety of the round. If you, as the negative, run a counterplan, and then halfway through you're like, actually, that counterplan is a horrible idea, but you can't vote me down for it, I'm just going to not defend it anymore. That would be a conditional counterplan. There's a whole lot of reasons why that seems like cheating, and why you shouldn't be able to do that. So you can make theoretical arguments as to why it's a bad argument to run, and why perhaps someone should lose the round for running it. T is Topicality, which is just saying that the affirmative failed to uphold the resolution. DA is a disadvantage. It's exactly the same as an advantage, but in reverse. So it's all the bad things that are going to happen because the plan happened. A K is a critique, which is just what I was saying with, that was really sexist, you should lose the round. They're constructing arguments that interrogate the paradigms where our actions are coming from. A lot of times they're going to talk about real-world impacts, saying that the rhetoric we use is important, and if our rhetoric is really statist, or really capitalist, or really sexist, we should be punished for it by losing the ballot. CP is a counterplan. It's an alternate textual advocacy, just like the plan of the affirmative. This is where firms came into play, has to be mutually exclusive, has to be competitive, and you also don't have to run a counterplan. As a negative, you can always defend the status quo instead. But counterplans can be a very effective strategic decision. A lot of times you can leverage a lot more offense on a counterplan than you can on the status quo, because the other team's already done a whole lot of work explaining harms that exist in the status quo. So having an alternate solution, instead of trying to explain why those harms don't exist, can sometimes be strategic. A turn goes with the offense-defense style of argument. Turns are offensive, and it's literally where you turn an argument around. So they say their link runs one direction, where they cause the economy to go up. You say, actually, no, you cause the economy to do the opposite, you cause it to go down. They say this improves relations with China. You say this actually worsens relationship with China. They say Israel first strikes are really bad. You say they're really good. Oil shocks are really bad. Oil shocks are really good. So they're just oppositional arguments where you say the exact opposite of what they did in order to leverage whatever they were gaining from that argument for yourself. Does that make sense? It's called determining the directionality of an argument. On-case versus off-case. So on-case positions are just direct responses to every advantage as well as the solvency of the plan. Off-case is everything else. So that's your counter plan, those are your disadvantages, that's your topicality. It's all the things that aren't directly addressing the case. On here, a turn is the only thing that would be an on-case style of argument. You can also make defensive arguments such as that won't happen or that doesn't solve. Offensive arguments are much more offensive and therefore more strategic. When is it supposed to end? It's supposed to end at half after?
Yeah.
Okay. 2 more slides. All right. Alright, so topicality. Like we said, topicality is indicting the affirmative for not upholding the resolution. It has several things. First is standards. Standards are all the ways in which they make the debate worse by not upholding the resolution. A couple of examples are, so education is actually a voting issue. Some of the most common examples are things like limits and ground, where I say I don't have the ground to access my disadvantage anymore because you did a plan that no longer relates to the topic. Therefore, I no longer have access to education. So these are kind of your internal link arguments in order to get to your voting issues, such as education or fairness or jurisdiction. Limits would be another example. It would be debates are only educational when we are limited to specific topics. Because you unlimited the round by moving outside the scope of what the resolution directed, you make the education in the round no longer accessible. A lot of people make breadth versus depth arguments there. The voting issue is exactly what you said. Reasons the standards matter. And why to vote on them. So your examples there would be education, fairness, and a lot of people also do jurisdiction, which is just the judge shouldn't vote for a plan that isn't topical because they're not supposed to, essentially the argument. I can't spell it all, please don't make fun of me. A reverse voting issue is a response to a topicality in which you make the argument on the affirmative in response to say, not only do we meet this, but there's actually a reason to vote against the negative team for running this topicality. So if you got up and you were like, well, actually, my definition under which my plan is topical creates so much better education that you should vote against the negative for running this argument. Or topicalities are bad. Or maybe one of their standards is bad. And those are all reasons to vote them down. Extra topicality is indicting them specifically for doing essentially resolution plus, for doing the resolution and something more. So an extra topical plan would be something like USFG should invest in medicine, and saying USFG invests in medicine and thus cures something. Or USFG will invest in medicine and nutrition, or something like that, where nutrition is an actual medicine, and so you're doing something beyond what the resolution has bound you into. FXT stands for effects topical. And it's when you have a plan that requires a cascade of events in order to achieve whatever the resolution designed it to. Such as, if the resolution says the United States federal government should significantly increase investment in education in the United States, doing something that would raise the residence prices in residential areas would increase taxes. Increasing taxes would increase local district funding, and that would improve investment from the greater public and therefore technically improve education. But there was this obscene long line of things that had to cascade in order to make that happen. And it was in effect of what my plan did, but what my plan did wasn't explicitly the resolution. So your plan in one single action needs to achieve what the resolution says. Does that make sense? Well,
Yeah.
Well, I have one more thing on counterplans, but I know there's a class on counterplans, so I'll define these just really, really quickly. I won't write them down. PICs are plan-inclusive counterplans or plan-exclusive counterplans. It's essentially when you run a counterplan that is the plan, except you pull part of the plan out. So we are going to cut the 1% tax, except for this one specific group of people, would be my counterplan if your plan was cut the 1% tax. They're really abusive. There's a lot of theory about why you maybe should run them.